Amol Sinha, thank you so much for being with us on ITV Gold. You are representing the ACLU New Jersey. I hope you're doing well, and I hope the team is doing well as well.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope you're well too.
Of course, just starting off this conversation, Amol, there's so much to discuss, so I'll go right into it. For our viewers that may not know about ACLU and its incredible works, if you could just educate us into what, ACLU is doing currently and what are the amazing, incredible works you do in the ACLU, that'd be great to start the interview.
Sure. So let me explain what the ACLU is. It's an organization that's been around for 100 years in the United States. We are a litigation organization, meaning we are in court every single day talking to judges about your constitutional rights, whether it's the right to free speech, to practice your religion the way you choose, to be free from unreasonable government searches, to be treated equally under the law. We are at the legislature as a policy organization every day talking to lawmakers about advancing civil rights and liberties and constitutional rights. And we're also a public education and communications organization where we're shifting the narrative of what it means to be a society that values civil rights and liberties. So we have been advocating for racial justice for 100 years. We've been talking about police reform and immigrants' rights, LGBTQ rights, and making sure that these sort of ideas that are embedded in the Constitution of equality and justice for all, that those are not just ideas, but actually, become reality for as many New Jerseyans and as many people in the United States as possible.
Let's talk about the issues and let's dig right into it, Amol, because there has been such a huge nationwide demonstration since the death of George Floyd. A huge conversation on systemic racism has come about. A huge demand there is for a change in the police departments. What has been ACLU New Jersey's stand on this entire case? It's almost been a month now. And at the same time, what are these changes that we need in our legislature or in our system itself to actually make room for minority communities and their rights?
So, first of all, the death of George Floyd was incredibly tragic. I mean, he was killed by a police officer, and police are designed to protect and serve all communities. But in this case, and in so many other cases, they are life-threatening rather than life-saving. And it's really important to acknowledge that, while the death of George Floyd is certainly not the first time a police officer has killed a Black person, there have been countless lives lost as a result of police brutality. It is a movement that feels a little bit different in this moment. It feels like there is more sustained activity towards progress. It seems like there are lawmakers and legislators heeding the call for change in meaningful ways. Hopefully, this is something that will last and sustain us and really change what it is that policing looks like in the United States. And that's where I think it's really important for us as the ACLU and other organizations like us to follow the lead of Black and Brown community members, to follow the leads of the movement for Black Lives, who are calling for significant changes to police, including divesting from policing and reinvesting in life-affirming services that we know will help individuals and communities. Police have an outsized footprint in this society, right? They have hundreds of billions of dollars annually throughout the country. Every year, there are hundreds more of millions of dollars that go into policing every year in every police department across the country. And it's really important to scrutinize, what we're doing with that money. Could that money be better used in other spaces that don't necessarily require the police, but we call on the police to address those issues? And what I mean by that is, look, instinctively, we as a society have decided that it's necessary to call the police for every single societal discomfort. And I want to change that. The ACLU is calling for a change to that, where, it might be better suited for a social worker or a psychologist or a crisis intervener to go into a space rather than police who are armed. And the issue here is that, look, every single institution in the United States is rife with systemic racism, whether it's education or corporate America or the legal system. Every single one is the medical system. It's all rife with institutional racism, particularly anti-Blackness. But it's the police that we give guns to, right? It's the police that we say that they can break laws that you and I can't break, right? They can run through traffic lights. They can park in front of a fire hydrant. And yeah, they can use force against people and kill people. So we need to have particular scrutiny of the way the police operate in our society. We need to shrink the toxic footprint of policing in the United States and reinvest in those services that we think can actually help people.
So from police defunding to the repeal of 50A, we're also looking at bans on chokeholds in certain states. Do you think these are significant changes, or do we need a really big change, possibly a constitutional change, to really truly fight systemic racism in this community?
I think the answer to that question is yes and yes, right? I do think that those are significant changes, but they assume the premise of policing as it is, right? They assume that policing should remain the way it is, and we should have accountability afterwards, right? Banning chokeholds, yes, that's important. However, why do we put police in situations where chokeholds are ever necessary, and why do we put people in situations where they may be choked by the police? Why is it that a unnecessary violent non-violent police interaction should ever lead to a chokehold in the first place? I think 50A, which you mentioned, the transparency issue of police misconduct, that's incredibly important, right? We need to know who the police department, who in the police department is conducting bad acts, who is engaging in misconduct, and what is each police department doing to reveal that misconduct to the public, and what disciplinary measures are they taking. All of that is incredibly important. But that doesn't prevent the bad act from happening in the first place. So I think it's important for us to make those sort of back-end changes to make sure that we are creating opportunities for people to really understand what policing looks like in the United States and create necessary accountability measures so that we hold police accountable every step of the way. But I think it's also necessary to reckon with the idea of policing as a whole and make sure that we are properly tailoring it to the core law enforcement functions that it was originally designed for, which is to protect us from active violence. Most policing in the United States, 80% of police interactions are for quote unquote quality of life offenses, right? Where people are talking to the police because of noise complaints or because they may be engaging in quote unquote disorderly conduct, right? So it's really important to know that almost less than 5% of police interactions is in response to any sort of violence. So I think it's necessary for people to understand, because oftentimes the response that we get when we talk about divesting from police is, what about violence, right? What about the people that are uncivil towards each other or violent towards each other? Yeah, of course, we're going to need people to intervene in those moments. But 95% of the time, we're talking about situations that occur without a hitch, that have no violence attached to them, and where people are just trying to go about their lives and their days, but they escalate because of the presence of police.
It's entirely a whole position of accountability here. Who is held responsible and who makes the changes? Amol, what did you and the ACLU have to say about the elected officials and how they have handled it in the state of New Jersey? But also, what is ACLU's stand on how President Donald Trump's administration has taken, its measures in this case?
Yeah. So let me start there with the question about Donald Trump. I think the fact that President Trump has taken steps to eliminate the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division and really sort of harness or hold back its power is a real problem, because before, the Civil Rights Division used to investigate police departments, engage in what's called consent decrees with police departments when there was misconduct, try to get police departments to respect people's civil rights. That work is not happening anymore. And that's really important. And if there's anything systemically problematic about the way this administration has been handling policing, I think that's one key aspect of it. The fact that they have essentially gutted the department that was in charge of police accountability. Other than that, I think Donald Trump's sort of rhetoric around race across this country is really problematic. Everything is nativist and racist and xenophobic. It doesn't only extend to immigrants. There's anti-blackness, the way he's talking about the protesters who are peacefully protesting across this country. I think there is a lot of harm that the president has been perpetuating because of his views on race and the way he views Black people in particular in the United States. As for New Jersey, I think we have a real opportunity here in our state. Look, New Jersey is one of the most diverse states in the country. We have the greatest proportion of South Asians in this country in terms of our population size. And I think it's a real opportunity for a diverse coalition to form to speak out on all of these issues. The opportunity that we also have is in our government, because we have a governor and an attorney general who's also South Asian, by the way, who care about people's lives, who care about accountable policing, who want to make sure that we are doing the right thing here. But even they need to be held accountable, and sometimes they don't go far enough. We saw recently that the attorney general announced a few accountability measures in New Jersey, including some limited transparency to make sure that we get the names of officers who are disciplined for serious misconduct. Now, that's only a sliver of the folks that actually engage in misconduct, right? The people that are actually significantly disciplined for it are few and far between. He announced an effort to license policing, meaning people who want to go into policing in New Jersey will have to obtain a license, and that license will follow them and their record, so that they can't just commit a bad act and then transfer to another department, and they'll be held accountable along the way, and that's a good thing. However, it has to be questioned why it is that it took so long in the first place, because New Jersey is just one of 6 states where that sort of scheme doesn't already exist. Wow. Licensing is a good step forward. Transparency is a good step forward. But I'll also say this, accountability is only able to happen if we allow for other forces other than the police to hold police accountable. So we have, of course, across police departments in the United States, something called internal affairs. Internal affairs are the folks that investigate police when there's misconduct. We need more than that, because, I believe, and I think most people believe, that the police can't police themselves. What we need is civilian oversight over policing, where non-police officers, advocacy groups, community members are in charge of oversight over misconduct over police departments. And the attorney general in our state has taken the position that that's something that's not necessary in our state, or shouldn't exist to the full extent that it could potentially exist in. And that's a real problem, and something that we hope to address. We also need to end something called qualified immunity for police, which is a legal doctrine that essentially says police departments and police officers can't be held liable for bad acts in court if what they were doing was within the confines of their job. Now,
that's very broad.
It's incredibly broad, and it's so broad, so much so that police routinely have killed people in the United States without being held liable, even if it's acknowledged that that killing was outside the scope of their duty. However, it still resulted in a death, right? So there have been really bad decisions about expanding qualified immunity in the United States, and it's taken a life of its own. And I think we need to take steps to rein it in and really pull back, that immunity that we allow to shield bad officers. So there's a lot of work there, but please, yeah.
Yeah, let me ask you one last question in terms of just addressing systemic racism and the issues of police brutality here. Rayshard Brooks was just laid to rest today. and Breonna Taylor. There are so many names when you start thinking about all of these lives that have been taken. What do you say when you see these things still happen while the nation is protesting, while laws are changing? There are police that are still behaving in that manner. What do you say to that?
I think that means that we're talking about something systemic and not individual. I think what that means is, these conversations about policing where, we so often talk about good apples and bad apples is the wrong approach. There's something fundamentally wrong with the way we allow police to operate in the United States. And that is mixed up in our racist history, and perhaps it's a direct consequence of our racist history in this country that has led to policing being the way it is. Yeah, I think it requires more examination than just accountability measures. It requires a bigger conversation than any one person or any one police interaction or any one police department. It's really about the way we as a society across the United States have decided to let police loose and give police this hero status where it's incredibly difficult to ever challenge policing or question police officers. I think also we need to think about the role of police unions in the United States. Police unions are at their core, they're supposed to be labor unions, advocating for better working conditions and fair wages and benefits for their employees. However, they have, sort of metastasized into this political creature where they have outsized influence on the way police budgets are spent. They have outsized influence in local and statewide and national politics. They are in control of so much, and most politicians are afraid to question the will of unions and union leaders, and that's a real problem. So I think it's a combination of understanding the racist history of our country, understanding the way policing perpetuates that racist history, and also understanding the political levers that exist in the United States, locally and nationally, that allow policing to remain at status quo rather than reform it.
It'll surely be interesting to see where all of this goes for the rest of the year and what reforms we see. I'd actually like to now go in and talk about DACA and the historic ruling of the Supreme Court, which just happened a few days ago. What is ACLU's stand on it, and how important do you think it was for DACA to be remained, and the protection of those 700,000 immigrants that are under it? What do you have to say about this entire ruling?
I think it's a great decision. It's really important to do whatever we can to make sure that we create as welcoming of an environment as possible for immigrant communities. Under the Trump administration, we have seen chaos when it comes to immigrants' rights. Right? He's not just targeting people who are undocumented; he's going after visa holders and people who are coming here through what he would call the proper channels. And I think it's really important that the Supreme Court upheld this decision that says that no, dreamers and people who qualified for DACA are American, and they deserve an opportunity to stay in this country and deserve to be protected with work authorization. I do think that it's not enough. We of course care deeply that the Supreme Court said this. But we need to take proactive steps to roll back all of the harm that the Trump administration has incurred across this country on immigrants' rights. We need to make sure that we're taking steps at the state level to protect immigrants here as well. I think you see the stories of children in cages. You see the stories of people being deported in record numbers. You see the stories of hate crimes against immigrant communities over and over and over again. That's sort of a top-down perpetuation of fear and hate that the Trump administration has engaged in. Now, the previous administration under the Obama era, Obama deported more people in this country than any other president before him. And that's an important statistic to remember, that immigrants' rights were under threat under Obama as well. But I think the redeeming factor was that he was taking steps to create pathways to work authorization through DACA. Under the Trump administration, what we're seeing is total chaos, where anybody could be targeted at any time. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to it. It includes South Asians. It includes people who are Indian and from other backgrounds. And if one of us is at risk, we're all at risk. And I think it's really important for all of us to speak out.
Amol, in terms of DACA, what according to you is going to be the future of these children? A lot of them are, they're adults now and they're working as well. They're on visas. How is that going to, or on a work permit actually, how is that going to sort of translate later on?
Yeah, not only are they on work permits, they are people that have children here who are U.S. citizens, right? DACA recipients have jobs as teachers and as nurses and as doctors in our country, and we can't afford as a society to try to remove all of them or create an environment where they're no longer welcome or unsafe. I think it's really important to the moral fabric of our society and the economic fabric of our society to make sure that we're as welcoming as possible. I hope the future holds good things for them. I hope what we see is a pathway towards permanent work authorization and permanent residency and perhaps even citizenship in the United States. And that's really important because, look, we're not going to, there's no way that we, through any legal process, we'd be able to get rid of, all 12 million undocumented people in the United States, or even the 700,000 DACA recipients in the United States. I think it's incredibly important that we try to create as meaningful and as welcoming of an environment as possible for all people in this country, and make sure that they're treated as American, because what we're going to see otherwise is a further increase in hate crimes against immigrant communities. We'll see a further increase in deportations, and we'll see a loss to our economy as a whole. And I think that's really important for us to acknowledge that it's not just racial justice, it's not just immigrants' rights, it's economic justice as well.
Yeah, and I think it's so important for organizations such as the ACLU to stand for these immigrants and to ensure that they have their right and their liberties to themselves, and that they are able to live a life. Just while we're still in this interview, I wanted to sort of reflect on the COVID-19 relief efforts and all of the programs that are currently running under the ACLU. If someone wanted to get help or, they were under distress, I would love for them to be able to reach out to your team and, get their voices heard.
Yeah, the work that we're doing at the ACLU is incredibly meaningful, and I feel it's incredibly urgent under COVID-19. In this moment of COVID-19, our role we see as trying to protect the most vulnerable, and that includes people who are incarcerated. And what that means is, jails and prisons in the United States are hotbeds for disease and virus, even in good times. And right now, what we're seeing is that they are the centers of virus concentration all across the United States. And in New Jersey, where I am, it's the death rate is the highest in the country related to COVID-19 in prisons. And that's really, really unfortunate. And it's something that was preventable. It's something, look, in New Jersey, we have more deaths related to COVID-19 in prison than New York and Massachusetts and Pennsylvania and Connecticut combined. And that's really heartbreaking. So we're taking steps to protect people. All public health experts and criminal justice experts agree that the best way to protect people in this moment is to allow people to leave prison and be properly self-isolated. And also that not only creates opportunities for them, it also creates it creates opportunity for people who are left behind in prison to properly self-isolate and socially distance, because prisons are not designed for social distancing, right? They're designed to warehouse people. And we have the ability right now to take steps to cure this problem and make sure that we don't see a resurgence of the disease because of inaction in our prisons. I think it's really important to note that even when things feel safe for us in the United States outside of prison in the world, the virus will continue to rage on in prison, and that's going to impact people who are incarcerated. Of course, it's going to impact people who are working in prisons, and it's going to impact their family members and anybody else that they touch. And we'll never truly be able to eradicate the virus until we address the conditions in our prisons. So we're working on one thing that's a pandemic-related health credit, so that if people are incarcerated during a public health emergency, they will get credit for the time served so that their sentences are reduced. The goal there is that in New Jersey and all across the country, there are thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people that are going to be released anyways in the next several months. Why should we allow them to expose themselves to the disease and bring that back into communities if we can take steps right now to release them and have them properly self-isolate and quarantine so that they don't further expose the disease to anybody else?
Wow, that is some incredible works. And of course, the rates of incarceration are anyways so high in this country. We can only imagine the impact of COVID-19 on that. What did you have to say about the impact of COVID-19 on the immigrant community? And since we are talking about the ACLU, immigrant rights are human rights. Are those under threat right now, according to you?
Yes. So let's talk about the impact of COVID-19. Black and brown communities are facing the burden of COVID-19 in all respects. We're facing the healthcare burdens, right? The Black people and brown people and Latino people are dying at a rate faster than that of their white neighbors. We are facing the economic burden, right? The people that are in the service industries that are disproportionately Black and brown are out of work, and the unemployment rates are through the roof. We're facing the further healthcare burdens of being service workers that are essential right now, where mostly immigrant or Black and brown community members are on the front lines in grocery stores and as delivery workers, as sanitation workers, in hospitals as nurses and doctors. So they're vulnerable as a result. So all of the harms associated with COVID, whether it's health or economic or educational, they're being inflicted on Black and brown communities and immigrant communities at a higher rate. So it's really important to recognize that, and also, when the time is right, to do a postmortem, so to speak, to understand what happened in this moment and how it impacted Black and brown communities across the country. What is it that the government did right? What is it that the government got wrong? How do we make sure that the fissures that exist in our society that have exacerbated as a result of COVID-19 are cured, so that we don't have to see the same sorts of disparate outcomes in the next emergency? Yeah. And to your question about immigrants' rights, immigrants' rights are under threat right now. They've always been under threat, but today and right now it feels particularly threatening because of the way the Trump administration treats immigrants, because of the way the Trump administration goes after immigrants in communities, and the way that Donald Trump himself talks about immigrants. He doesn't talk about, communities like Asian communities or Latinx communities or Black communities as though they are American. It seems as though the Trump administration has an idea of who is an American in this society, and unfortunately, you and I don't fit the bill, and that's really, really dangerous for our country as a whole, and the principles this country was founded on, which too often go unrealized.
Amol, this was so great having you here on ITV Gold with us. I think we gained a lot of perspective and a lot of understanding of what's happening. My only question to you right now would be, when we're looking at all of these issues that we just discussed, and we talked about the ACLU stand, when you look at the elections in November, or say the primaries that are going on right now, how important, according to you, is for us to vote and exercise that right, especially in this moment?
It is incredibly important. We have, a democracy in this country, and the goal of the democracy is only realized when we have full participation. And it's oftentimes I hear from South Asian folks and friends of mine who think that it's not important to vote, or that voting is not designed for them, or that government service is not designed for them. But it's all. I mean, I have to say that that's true, right? Like oftentimes these institutions are not designed with us in mind, but we have to elbow our way through and make sure that we are making our voice heard, and make sure that, look, as a South Asian and as an Indian American, I realize the privilege that I have, which is that I have educational privilege. I came from a family that valued education and economic prosperity. I am grateful for my position in life and the role that I have at the ACLU to do meaningful work. It's my duty to share that privilege with others who have less. But I'm also aware of the varying degrees of oppression that I have and that our communities face. We are neither the most privileged nor the most oppressed. And what we need to do is carry that nuance everywhere we go, use our oppression to advocate for ourselves, for sure, but use our privilege to advocate for those who are more oppressed than us. And that includes, Black folks and Latinx folks who are bearing the brunt of police violence and educational inequities and societal inequities in the United States. And we need to use our power to vote for people who will take care of all communities, including Black and Brown communities, including South Asian communities, because if anybody's rights are at risk, we're all at risk.